Here we're going to look at the processing, the metabolism of carbohydrates. And that starts with this figure shown, which is glycolysis. And glycolysis literally means, broken down into two parts here, glyco and lysis. Glyco referring to sugar, lysis meaning to break. So it literally means to break down sugar. And here's our glucose, which arrives in many cases from the bloodstream through the ISF, the interstitial fluid, across membrane transporters here to be utilized. Now, there are a few cell types that actually store glucose, and it could come from within the cell as well. But ultimately, it has to come from the diet and therefore via the bloodstream. Now, glycolysis is actually broken up into several different phases here, and we're not really all that concerned about the specific biochemistry. So let's keep this fairly simplistic. In the first phase here, it's called the priming phase. We actually have to utilize two ATP molecules to energize, prime the sugar molecule. Then we proceed to split that in the second phase here. And in a third phase, probably the most important phase, we actually generate multiple ATPs, right? And so we utilize two at the top here in the priming phase, and we generate four at the bottom. And so we have a net production of +2 ATP for all of glycolysis. Now, that is actually fairly insignificant relative to the total energy found within glucose. So if we fully metabolize glucose aerobically, utilizing the pathways within the mitochondria, we can actually get about 30 or even a little bit more ATPs. And so glycolysis really isn't, in most cases, about the ATP production. It's more so about the production of this, the two molecules of pyruvate. And the reason for that is that those two molecules of pyruvate are going to go to the Krebs cycle, right, which is found inside the mitochondria. So it's essentially producing the substrate for the mitochondria to continue the process of energy transfer to to ATP molecules, essentially. Right? Now, one important thing to point out here is that the Krebs cycle activities and the mitochondrial activities in general are O2 dependent, oxygen dependent. This is why we breathe, right? And so without that oxygen, right, we are kind of stuck because then we don't end up going this way, right? With limited oxygen, shown here on the left, we end up with only these two ATP as opposed to that extra 30 or so that we might get through mitochondrial reactions. And those two ATP become the only two you're going to get, which makes them is really important. It's also important to point out that yes, we are stuck with these two ATP if we're O2 limited, but also that glycolysis is a more high power ATP producing mechanism than all of these mitochondrial actions. They are much more efficient. They extract more energy from glucose, but we can generate ATP faster, even at that really low efficiency, through glycolysis. So whenever cells that have very high metabolic rates, like muscle cells, skeletal muscle cells, need ATP very quickly, they tend to rely on glycolysis more so than the aerobic pathways because glycolysis can generate ATP more quickly, even with that lousy efficiency.